Hey friend, welcome to Authentic Performance, the podcast. My name is Nat and I'm your host. At Authentic Performance, our mission is to provide education and advocacy for all athletes, developing awareness surrounding identity, purpose, and health, so athletes can live well beyond their sport. This week's guest is a sports dietitian and strength coach, Derek Lipton. Derek owns Full Circle Nutrition, where he provides services for athletes and adults to reach their performance goals in a variety of sports and activities. We talk about his role working with athletes and how he can support individuals in fueling their bodies properly for their personal needs and sport, as well as educating them so they have a well-rounded understanding of their body. Derek is a wealth of knowledge, so take note of his incredible insight. Now let's get to it. Sweet. Well, Derek, welcome to the podcast. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
I'm excited to chat. So to start things off, I would love for you to just tell everyone a little bit about yourself.
Of course. So my name is Derek. I am a registered dietitian, sports dietitian, and a strength and conditioning coach. So I started with my education in University of Maryland, got a bachelor's in science and nutrition, did my dietech internship and took the exam to become the RD, worked in clinical for a little bit, and then I decided to kind of freelance and start grad school. And while doing grad school, I also, because it was all online, so I also did internships with IMG Academy, University of Georgia Athletics, and Duke University soccer team, just kind of immersing myself into the world of sports nutrition. And then after that, I started my own practice, working with athletes all over the world, all levels, competitive, recreational, everything. So I've been doing that for like 4 years now. And during that time, I also took additional certification exams for the board certified specialist in sports dietetics and the certified strength and conditioning coach.
Wow, lots of fun stuff. What does your role look like as both a sports dietitian and then doing the strength conditioning stuff as well, and also just running your own practice? What does that look like for you daily?
So the strength and conditioning is kind of not an afterthought, but it's kind of a background thing. So it's rare that I'm really just doing that with someone. Like I have plans on my website that athletes can download, but I don't really do like any in-person training or things like that. Bulk of what I do is the nutrition coaching. That's what my background really is. That's more my expertise. So I do that. So I'll do the meal plans. I'll do the one-on-one coaching. And during those one-on-one coaching sessions, some athletes will need help with their strength and conditioning. So I guide them there. And as far as owning my own practice, one of the questions I get a lot is, what does a typical day look like for you? And there is no answer to that. There is no typical day. And that's part of why I love it, because I wake up every day and I have to look at my schedule, and, some days I might have 5 clients, some days I might have no clients. And it's those days are, admin days. That's where I get my social media done. So I'll record videos, I'll edit the videos, write the captions, all those things. So it's really, it's chaotic and can be a little stressful, because you're like, some days are less than others and things like that. But typically, yeah, it's just a combo of clients, like sessions, messaging, social media, emails, doing podcasts like this, kind of getting that outreach. But it's crazy. And what's even crazier about it, and probably the part I don't like, is the hours are different. So especially during the school year, because I work with a lot of kids, it's, I could start my day at 9:30 and, I don't finish that day until 7:30 or 8. But there's a lot of gaps in between. Like I'm not going to work 10 hours straight through, but I'll take gaps, I'll take breaks. But the day is extended, and that part gets a little annoying sometimes, because it's like you're working with clients that need this schedule, clients that need that schedule, and you're kind of spread out. But it's good because I can get a lot done.
Yeah, that's true. Athletes too just have crazy schedules typically, and different sports, have different schedules too. And then working with people all over the place, like that's got to be a crazy schedule. I'm curious to know just kind of the difference from a typical dietitian who might work with non-athletes, and then kind of what you do working specifically with athletes.
So I guess we'll call it regular dietitian. That's what I started out in. So the most popular area for dietitians is clinical. So working in hospitals, nursing homes, rehab centers. So that's where I did, right? So I worked at it's called a skilled rehab. So it's kind of like patients were in a hospital for a surgery or a heart attack or something like that, and they don't need to be in the hospital anymore, but they can't quite go home. So they go here. And that's where I was. And that part's a little boring because it's a lot of the same stuff. You're talking to patients that don't really care. They're part of the reason why a lot of times why they're there is because their nutrition was poor and they're older and they just don't care to change it. So that was frustrating. Um, and it's just a lot of, oh, get your protein up, get this in, and that's the clinical sense. Then there's other types of outpatient and private practice dietitians as well. So the most popular that people think of is weight management. So a lot of dietitians will deal with that, whether it's in a clinical standpoint as far as like certain diseases or hormone imbalances are causing uh, disturbances in metabolic function. So you're dealing with that. You're dealing with diabetes, heart disease, things like that. There's community nutrition where you help out with schools and just working with WIC and SNAP and all that. So there's a lot of that involved, and I do some of that. Like in my private practice, I don't work just with athletes. I do work with just general adults trying to build muscle or lose weight as well. But even with those, there's usually some performance component involved. Like they're very active, they might run marathons or they want to play recreational sports, so it's involved there. But yeah, there's a lot of general dietitian, and then there's like the niche of athletes. And when it comes to athletes, one thing you're dealing with is ever changing schedules. So it's you have workouts these days, and then you have a month where your workouts change. And like for an adult in general nutrition, you're dealing with someone that's working out 4 to 5 times a week, and that's pretty consistent throughout the year, unless vacation, holidays, things like that. With athletes, you're going from, okay, September through November, you're practicing 5 days a week, and you have a game, and you might lift a couple times. And then the next 4 months after that, no, now you're lifting 4 days a week, and you're running 4 days a week, and you're not doing as much skill work, but now you want to gain weight or you want to lose weight. So it's periodization. So it keeps you on your toes and makes things more fun. And so that's one of the big differences there. And one of my favorite parts is, one of the things we learned with being dietitian is like behavioral coaching and like motivation, like motivational change. And you don't have to do that as much in athletes, and it's great because they are so highly motivated and so highly disciplined. So you don't have to convince them. Well, not always, but most of the time, you don't have to convince an athlete like, hey, you really need to do this because this is going to help you with this. Like, they want it. They want it so badly because they know what's at stake. And I love working with that.
Yeah, that is kind of just the mindset typically, especially if you're a successful athlete or, playing at a really high level, you have to have a certain level of discipline too. So it would seem like those things might come easier than, say, someone who isn't consistently working out or eating well or anything. So yeah, I want to know kind of just what the role of nutrition is in sports performance. Like I'm studying mental performance and sports psychology.
Mm-hmm.
But what is the role of nutrition in performing well in athletics?
Yeah. So, there's easy and complex answers to that. So, simply put, nutrition is fuel for your body. So, you eat the right amount of calories for your energy, the right amount of protein for recovery and muscle growth, carbs for energy, fat for energy and hormone health, and all that. Basically, nutrition, if you eat right, you eat the right amount of foods at the right times and all that, you're going to have better energy. And it's not just energy for games or competition, but it's the energy for your workouts, because that's where you get better. The off-season workouts, the in-season practices, and fueling day in and day out. And that's the hard part. A lot of athletes will say, hey, I'm fine, what do I eat the day of a game? And they're very disciplined about that. But you got to be disciplined every day of the week, because if you don't eat properly going into practice, you're not going to get the most out of it. You're going to come into game day drained. So basically, nutrition, it fuels the body. It's gas for the car. It fuels the body. And we talk about that as far as like, if you have good nutrition, you're going to perform better. But bad nutrition can also make you weaker. It can make you higher risk of injury, poor concentration, all that kind of stuff. So it's really that missing link. You can do all the hard work, but if you're not eating the right way for your body, that hard work's not going to be any benefit.
Yeah. So with that, like you kind of mentioned already, what's the impact on injury prevalence with nutrition, and like what are some maybe preventative measures that you recommend athletes take, or even certain things that athletes are doing wrong that might put them at higher risk? What is the role of nutrition in
Yeah.
managing that?
So a lot of injuries are preventable with good nutrition, or at least the risk can be limited. The biggest one we see is stress fractures. So stress fractures, obviously calcium and vitamin D intake is important. But a lot of stress fractures, and we see them in female athletes, is from amenorrhea. So you don't get your period, so your estrogen level is lower, and that decreases your bone mineral density, higher risk of fractures. So the biggest mistake I see is female athletes being afraid to gain weight or being afraid to eat too much, or, I hate when I see this, being happy that they don't get their period. And I mean, I've never had a period, but I get it. I know it's not the most pleasurable time of the month. And yeah, it sounds great to not get it, but biologically it's bad. And trying to educate on that part. But yeah, so there'll be female athletes that think, hey, if I eat really healthy and I stay lean, I'm going to be faster, I'm going to be better. And that's that big mistake that you mentioned that leads to injury risk, because yeah, they're lean, they're eating healthy, but they're underweight, they're not getting their period, and now they're getting a stress fracture. So that's probably the biggest mistake I see as far as like nutrition leading to injury.
Gotcha. So with those who might be, say, under eating, not getting enough calories for especially like the physical activity that they're performing, what are some things that you kind of do to encourage them? Maybe even just from like a mental aspect, because I know like, especially with females, and like I played college basketball, like there's this image too of like how you think you're supposed to look, or body image stuff, that especially females, and I don't want to exclude males because I know that there are definitely
Yeah.
situations there, but in my experience, how do you encourage those females specifically to eat more, or to eat, be taking vitamins or whatever they need to do to
Yeah.
prevent those injuries?
Yeah, and you're right. It is mostly psychological at that point. Because, well, especially by the time they're working with me. So if I get someone that's disordered eating or just under fueling and they sign up for my nutrition coaching, they know it's an issue. They know their nutrition is not good and that they're under eating, and they know they need to eat more, but they still just can't do it on their own. So it's a lot of psychology. It's identifying the obstacles and the reasons why. So sometimes it's simple, sometimes it's harder to get to. So you have athletes that they've gotten compliments on their abs, right? And people think, oh, that's great. Like, oh, you look great. And they don't see any harm in saying that, because we're always told, don't call people fat. And we never realize that saying someone looks skinny or saying someone that looks great could also be harmful, because now you have it in this young 12, 13, 14-year-old kid, whether it's a boy or a girl, who is trying to find themselves in this world, trying to impress people and make people happy with them. All of a sudden, you made that six pack their identity, and you don't realize it, and the kid doesn't realize it either. But now they're terrified to gain weight because they want to keep getting those compliments, and they know they need to eat more to be a better athlete. Some of them think a six pack is going to make them better. Some start to understand that it doesn't. But yeah, it's identifying them. Once you identify why they believe a certain thing or why they're afraid to do it, then it gets a little bit easier, because then you can kind of work with them and get them to understand that it's not rational, right? It's not rational to want to appease everyone and have that six pack. Like, you can impress people with your performance on the field instead. So a lot of it is the psychology and getting down to the why, because it is not just as simple as saying, hey, you need to eat more and gain weight because you're going to get injured if you don't. They don't care for the most part, or they do, but it's not enough. So yeah, it's all about getting down to the bottom of it.
Yeah, I love that you mentioned the identity piece too, because I think just naturally with athletes, that's a common issue of like identity. I know that that's a big part of my story of like transitioning out of sports and like, who am I? But then even deeper than that is a lot of these like, I guess, stereotypes or just expectations that might be had physically. I know there's some sports are worse than others, with like physique wise and how people think that they're supposed to fit in to that, mold. But I agree. Like there's a big problem with the identity and really like holding on to that as who you are or who you have
Yeah.
to be. So yeah, I think it's important to talk about it. Like the awareness piece is also huge, as you're saying too, like getting them to
Yeah.
that point. Um, I'm curious to know how your approach changes with different athletes, whether that be different genders, different sport, different builds. Like, how does that change for you, or does it change at all with how you approach those athletes?
Yeah, so that's a really interesting question because I'll get a lot of questions like in my DMs or comments like, "Hey, how should I eat as a 16-year-old basketball player?" And like that's the whole question. And a lot of people think like, "All right, diet changes based on your sport." And it does, but it doesn't. Like your sport itself does not dictate your diet. It's not like this is a soccer diet, this is a basketball diet. Your diet is impacted by your activity level, so your training load and all that, your height, your weight, your body composition, and your goals. So we'll think like, oh, like football players need to eat so much more than other athletes. And yes, for the most part, that's true. But because no other sport has 300-pound players in it, right? Like football players tend to be bigger. So yeah, they're going to eat more food. It's not the specific demands of football that make it them need more food. So yeah, so I take into account, I calculate the calorie needs, so height, weight, age, and activity level, and then their goals. Do you want to gain weight? Do you want to lose weight? Are you just looking to maintain performance? Are you in season or out or off season? All those things, and it's a lot of factors that come into play. And then what I take it a step further with the individualization of it, and that's with my one-on-one coaching because we like sit down and we talk and all that. That's where I really get into nitty gritty there because I'll factor all that in and I'll calculate their needs, but then I want to see how they're currently eating. Because let's say I calculate that an athlete needs 3,200 calories and we look at their food log and they're eating 2,000 a day, maybe, right? There's no snacks in there. Breakfast is small. Like they're really not eating. I can't just have them go eat 3,200 calories right away because that's too much for them. So we build up to it. So that's why whenever I get that question, like, oh, how should I eat as a basketball player? Or how many calories should I eat? I can't answer that to a random person because I need to see what you're currently doing. Because typically the answer is going to be you need to eat a little bit more than you currently are and then build up to this. So, but yeah, it's interesting because people will think that the sport dictates their calorie needs individually, but it plays a role, but it's not the sport itself.
Yeah, it's interesting how individualized it is too. Like I started working with a nutrition coach after I stopped playing basketball, which was just because I was trying to figure out what to do. I was injured, so I couldn't really exercise a lot, and so I was like, well, I can manage this part of my life, and I don't really know what to do because as an athlete, I just ate whatever. Especially like in college, like our whole team would just go to the cafeteria together
Yeah.
and eat whatever. But we had that same approach, like what are you eating now, and then like where do we need to be, but being aware of where I was at because I was under fueling for where I needed to be, but I had no idea because I didn't have like a base or whatever. But
Yeah, that's a big problem I see too. Is like athletes will think that they don't believe they're under fueling because, well, I'm doing fine, I'm doing well, like, and it's kind of like yeah, a misconception because you're doing well because you're naturally a good athlete, and if you're just so naturally gifted and you've put in the work, you're gonna do pretty well in comparison to others, regardless of how you eat. But that's at that level. So you're a high school athlete and you're dominating. But if you don't fix the nutrition, you're gonna get to college and everyone's the same. Because like I said, yeah, like genetics, just natural gift, it makes a difference. For example, I heard stories with I think it was the Beijing Olympics or one of them, and Usain Bolt ate like 100 McNuggets or something every single day, and he still obviously won the 100-meter dash, right? And you could look at that and be like, well, good nutrition doesn't matter. He ate like crap and he won the race. Where when in reality you realize if any other athlete did that, they'd probably throw up or they would cramp. They would not. They would lose time. But he's just so naturally gifted that he could pretty much do whatever. But that's the top 0.00001% of athletes, and that if you're not that person, your nutrition will make a difference. And you might be doing great right now at the high school level, but if you keep up what you're doing now and you don't fix the nutrition when you get to the college level, everyone is the same, and you're going to realize, oh, I wish I had fixed this before.
Yeah, and there's always things that you can do as an athlete to get better, with like even if you're doing really well, like, and I think it's important too to think about the things that set you up for success even after sport, which like we can talk about that later, but um like if you're an athlete and you're like, oh well, I'm just going to be as good as I'm going to be, but then you don't ever focus on your nutrition or even strength training or anything, then you might have some issues after you're no longer in that sport of even being healthy. Like those are skills, that you can use after you exit the sport. So actually, I'll just ask you now, like, what have you worked with any athletes that are leaving sport, or like what would be some kind of guidelines or advice, I guess, for those people who are getting ready to exit the
Yeah.
like competitive aspect?
I haven't dealt with like too much of that. I've dealt a little bit like, so I've had a few athletes go from, I work with them high school, like during high school, and then they go to college and they decide not to play their sport. um, and a lot of the time they're just kind of getting into fitness. So it's like chances are if that is the case, they probably weren't super competitive anyway. They just want to kind of fix their general nutrition habits, whether it's just ordered eating and all that. So the transition from sport to general fitness wasn't too difficult. But I've dealt with some others that either quit their college sport or, they were former college athletes and now they sign up with me. So I didn't see them as an athlete, but yeah, it's still the same concept of like finding that why. You're finding the why of the nutrition and finding the why of the fitness as well, and the motivating factor. So it's big, and a lot of times we encourage continue something athletic related. So running, like I recently picked up running. Right, I did my first half marathon back in June, and because I didn't play college sports, but I played sports all through high school, very competitive, and even now as an adult working out, I, I had I didn't really have that much motivation working out. Like, why am I lifting? Like, I don't really enjoy this. And then same thing with nutrition. Like, I'm only eating for my health, but like, it's boring. So you that's the biggest. Yeah, like you said, basically back to your question, the biggest struggle with dealing with a former athlete and then transitioning into non-athletics is that motivation, because your whole life you're not only just told what to eat and what to do for your workouts, but you had a reason. I'm going to wake up at 6 a.m. and crush it in the gym because that's going to help us win a championship this year. Now, what's the motivation? I'm going to crush it at 6 a.m. so I can look good at the beach for 2 days this summer. Like, it's not the same. So having that, whether doing rec sports, like I had this one adult client and he just played rec soccer. That, like, he's in his 30s, right? Playing rec soccer like on Sunday leagues, things like that. But he took it very seriously, and they're a little bit more competitive leagues, but he took it seriously, and that's why we worked together, was to help him with that. And there's no problem. There's nothing wrong with, even though there's no scholarship involved, there's no championships. There's nothing wrong with that. If that's what motivates you, that's what gives you that intrinsic desire to work out, or even the extrinsic motivation, go for it, because that's gonna help you stay on track.
Yeah, and that's something that I had to learn too. Like when you are done with sport, like if you're an athlete, you always have this like competitive nature, especially if you played at a pretty high level. Like there's always something that you want to, something more that you want to strive towards. And those are like super helpful things to not only, like with the nutrition and the training and stuff, have that motivation, but also just like for your mental health, like
Yeah,
to manage like those desires of like competitiveness and like wanting to be a part of something. Like that's a big issue with people that are like transitioning out of sport, and like the identity piece, because they feel like they just have to let it completely go. So I think it's awesome to find something that you can do, and
yeah,
then also helps with nutrition and training and like staying healthy while also having that purpose. um
yeah,
I would love to know. I've seen on like your social media before, like common myths with nutrition, with sports nutrition specifically. So I would love to just hear a couple like misconceptions, myths, about sports nutrition that you often encounter, and how they're debunked, I guess.
yeah. So the biggest one that I talk about and we've seen is thin equals fast, right? Because we think, oh, these top runners, are, you see those athletes, they're thin and all that. And I actually got a comment the other day. It was like, oh, you see these runners, they don't need to gain weight. Like they're all thin. And I'm like, they're not thin, they're fit. And there's a big difference there. They're not skin and bones. They look skinny maybe, and yeah, they're not big, but they're lean, right? They have muscle on them. They're not super super thin, and they work to get there. So a lot of athletes will think, oh, I need to lose weight because I want to run faster. I need to lose weight, and that's gonna make me faster. But they're like 5'8", 130 pounds. I'm like, are you overweight? Because you're not. And what happens there is they start eating less to lose weight, and they get slower. And like, well, why is this happening? Well, you weren't running slow because of your weight. You were running slow because you weren't eating enough. So the one thing that was making you slower, you just made it worse. So that's the big one. Another, I don't see this as much anymore, but it's been on and off over the last few years with the rise in social media or on TikTok. I don't really know if this is a myth, but athletes following bodybuilder plans to get bigger. So they see a bodybuilder and the way they eat and the way they lift, and they want to gain 20, 30 pounds of muscle for their sport. So they're going to follow that plan or follow this guy. And it might work as far as getting bigger, right? Usually it doesn't because there's other factors involved, but it might work. But let's say it does. That's not going to make you a better athlete because those guys are not lifting and eating to become better soccer players, to run 10 miles, to whatever it is, right? They're just getting big. And if you follow that plan, you're going to get bigger, but you're going to get slower. You're going to get worse at your sport. I think a big myth is saying like, oh, like any muscle growth is going to make me a better athlete. But no, you got to build muscle as an athlete. You got to lift like an athlete, eat like an athlete. So yeah, those are probably the two biggest ones I can think of on the top of my head. I mean, I do encounter other ones. I guess other little ones will be like, processed food is bad for you. And it is if you have a lot of it. But like, what I have to explain to a lot of clients is like why processed food is bad. So the two main reasons processed food is bad is, one, there's not a lot of nutrients in it. So you're not getting as many vitamins and minerals, and it tends to be less filling. So the average person might eat a lot of processed food and they're going to be low in nutrients and they're going to keep eating more calories because they're not full. So that leads to weight gain. As a high level athlete that needs 3,500 calories a day, fitting in these processed foods along with your whole food diet can be beneficial because you're going to get all your nutrients from all the whole foods you're eating. And now all you're doing is you're adding in foods that give you more calories without filling you up, because that's what processed foods do. But that's what you need because you're struggling to hit your 3,500 calories. So we're not talking about a diet full of processed foods, but we're talking about including some in there. And they think if I add this, I'm going to be a bad athlete. But no, you actually become a better athlete because you're taking your good diet and you're just adding more calories. And I see this all the time. And even with clients that have had eating disorders, this one client I remember a few years ago, she ran her first half marathon and she did phenomenal in it. And the night before she had, I think it was Cliff Bar, cereal, and ice cream the night before. And this is a girl that had anorexia when she was younger. And it was just phenomenal to see that because she was terrified to ever eat that stuff. And you see what happens when you do it. So that's probably one of the biggest myths I deal with as well.
Yeah. And it's interesting too, just the relationship with food. I think that that's something that I struggled with being in sport and then having to, just exit sport kind of abruptly was I don't even know how to manage eating now, that I'm not an athlete and not, super competitive and all that. But there was this relationship both with exercise and food that was kind of difficult to manage. And I think kind of what you're saying is speaking to that too, of just learning to be okay too with eating stuff that maybe you thought was bad, when you go to your friend's birthday party, it may not be the end of the world for you to have a piece of cake, even if you're doing really well nutritionally, little things here and there, also psychologically, you got to think about the relationship with food and not just bad, good, like you're saying too, those things that may typically be labeled as bad, I guess, can have benefits in different contexts. So it's all
Yeah.
about, that relationship and then what context they're in. Um,
Yep.
I would love to know a little more. I know you said most athletes do have kind of that discipline and motivation naturally just because they're already involved in sport. But what are some of the things that you do to help athletes make long lasting behavior changes? So, something that maybe won't just last in their sport, but also beyond building those positive skills.
Mhm. Yeah. So the way I approach my nutrition coaching is it's educational. It's not like directive. So it's not like, hey, eat this for breakfast, eat this for lunch, like that. I give them obviously suggestions and multiple idea or multiple options to choose from. But as often as I can, I explain why to them. And it's little tidbits throughout each session, but over time it adds up. So they're not just going through the motions. They're understanding why. Like, oh, why am I eating a lot of carbs? Oh, because these carbs are going to help me fuel that workout later. Oh, I'm eating more carbs today because of this or XYZ. So understanding that and really getting them to understand like what's different about this plan versus someone who is not an athlete. So that they know like, okay, when I stop playing sports, I'm not just going to cut all carbs altogether because no, I still need that. But they understand, okay, I'll reduce it a little bit, or I'll cut down on this snack. But yeah, I always emphasize this with clients like, when we do like the consult calls beforehand as well. Is the idea of this is you don't have to work with me for the rest of your life. You could work with me for a couple sessions, several months, a year, whatever it is. Whenever we do stop working together, you should be able to continue to implement what we worked on and continue to make changes as necessary based on what you've learned with working together. Because the goal is to not just get you on path right now, but to learn from it.
Yeah, that's a really good approach. And yeah, definitely helpful for long term, figuring things out, even if you're not working directly with them. Um,
Yeah.
I would love to know, do you have any tips for athletes? Like, I know typically the athlete has a pretty busy schedule, and like we even talked about, for like meal prepping or planning in any way that makes it easier to hit those needs, even maybe with like snacks, like knowing what to have on hand so that that becomes easier, or what's kind of your approach when people are struggling just with the time aspect of
Yeah.
nutrition?
And that's where the whole fear of processed foods comes into play because a lot of times athletes need these processed foods because it's that or nothing. Because you can't bring chicken and rice with you as a snack when you're sitting in class or just going out with the friends, things like that. So adding things like not that trail mix is processed, but like protein bars, Cliff bars, like pretzels, peanut butter crackers, things like that that you can sneak in as snacks throughout the day, and that's going to open up, right? I always ask athletes like, "Oh, do you have a snack during school?" No, I'm not allowed to eat in class, or I don't have time. Okay, how much time do you have between class? Oh, I have 3 minutes, 4 minutes, 5 minutes. You can eat a Cliff bar in that 4 minute walk to class, but they never think about that. But the thing with being an athlete and being so busy is you have to multitask. And a lot of that multitasking comes with eating. You're going to eat a snack while doing homework. So it's not, oh, I do homework for 2 hours and then go get my snack. No. During that last hour of homework, you're going to pick out a PB&J or a cereal or trail mix, whatever that is. You're going to drink a smoothie. You have to do a lot of multitasking. You're going to eat in the car. You're going to sleep in the car. You're going to do homework in the car. Whatever it is. You have an hour ride to practice. No, you're not just sitting on your phone. You're doing something during that hour ride because you take this 24-hour day and you need to somehow make 26 hours because otherwise you're not going to sleep or get whatever it is. Like, these athlete schedules are absolutely absurd. And the high school, especially the high schoolers now versus 10, 15 years ago, it's insane what they're doing. Especially with these competitive teams, there's a lot more travel involved. So it's just, you have to be okay with those processed foods, those simple foods. You have to be okay with going out to eat. You're not going to eat McDonald's every single day. I don't recommend that. But if you have to eat Chick-fil-A and Chipotle and Subway 3 times a week, that's fine. It's going to be better to do that than not eat at all.
Yeah.
And on top of that, meal prepping. Because as much as I say it's okay to eat out, I don't want you getting takeout every single night. And a lot of times I'll be like, oh, what do you do for dinner? And they get takeout every night because they have late practice. They have siblings, so their parents are bringing there. The parents can't cook, all that. So let's meal prep. Let's take a little bit of time on the weekend or one evening, whatever it is, and just take an hour to meal prep dinners for that week. and you're set. You microwave it and you go. And it doesn't have to be complicated. You could even just cook up a bunch of chicken at the beginning of the week, get those microwavable bags of rice or pasta, and make a salad. And now you have a meal.
Yeah. Simple
as that. But a lot of times we overcomplicate things and think, oh, we have to cook these extravagant meals and they have to be this and that. And, my meal has to be a protein smoothie or has to be a yogurt bowl. And if you can do that, that's great. But in the end, it's, keep things simple and you'll succeed.
Yeah, and you have to adapt a lot as an athlete anyways. So, building on those habits of problem solving and doing what you can, the multitasking, it's going to be something you have to do for your whole athletic career with everything. You go to college to play sports. My brother plays Division I football right now. He is also a pre-med major. So he doesn't have time to just, sit around and, enjoy himself whenever he's not at practice or in class. You've got to make sure that those things are taken care of, whether it be the nutrition or, other things, obviously, you're talking about multitasking. So to kind of wrap up this talk on nutrition a little bit, we'll talk about supplements and hydration a little bit. But if there's any athlete listening that is just interested in improving their nutritional habits, what's a good starting point, and what advice would you give them?
I think a good starting point is to look at your snacks. And part of this comes back to the timing, and part of it comes back to just understanding. With regards to meals, for the most part, everyone eats 3 meals. Breakfast is iffy, but for the most part, you're going to eat breakfast, lunch, and dinner because it's scheduled. You eat breakfast when you wake up. You're told when to eat lunch if you're in school, and then dinner's with your family. Snacks are so open-ended. There's really, you're not in preschool anymore. There's no snack time, right? So a lot of athletes forget about these. Or they think grabbing a banana or a few pretzels is a snack. That's not a snack. So look at your snacks. If you feel like you're eating a lot, but you're not getting better, you're not gaining weight, look at your snacks. So you might feel like you're eating a lot at meals, but that's it. Are you eating 3 snacks a day? Do at least 2 of these snacks have protein in them? Do they have fat and do they have carbs? Right? Look at that. Because if you're not eating those snacks and you're a high-level athlete, that's why you're struggling. But you have to be disciplined. And even if you have to set an alarm in your phone, 10:30 a.m., oh, eat a snack now. Oh, 8 p.m., let me go make my smoothie. That's fine. Eventually it's going to become a habit and you don't have to do that. But look at your snacks because chances are you're not eating enough. You're eating big meals, so you think you are, but your snacks need to be big. And at least one of those snacks, for the most part, should be like a meal. So it could be a smoothie, a PB&J, a yogurt bowl. Look at those and get those into your diet, because that's probably the biggest thing I work on with clients is improving those snacks.
Yeah, and I would say that's a pretty manageable first step too. It's not this daunting thing. It may be for some, but if you simplify it a little bit, it can be a reasonable thing to add. So that's awesome. So going into a little more of supplements and hydration, for you and your clients, where do supplements fit in, and what is kind of your approach? Do you recommend any supplements specifically for athletes, and what does that look like deciding what athletes should be taking?
So like most dietitians, I like to take what's called a food first approach. What can we get from food before looking into supplements? Because it's an easier way to go about things. It's more fun. It's better because you're going to absorb it. And then we look at, okay, what supplements do we need? So certain supplements like creatine and protein powder, 2 very popular ones. Because creatine, you can't get enough from food. You have to eat 5 pounds of meat a day. You're not going to do that. So that's fine. Protein powder is another supplement that I look at it as not necessarily a supplement, but another food choice. And that's where it gets tricky. Some athletes will think they have to drink a protein shake because that's the only way they build muscle. But no. Protein shake, yogurt, chicken, it's all going to work the same. Protein powder is just convenient and another source. So if you're drinking 3 shakes a day, we got to fix that. But if you have good meals, good snacks, and you need to make a smoothie for breakfast because you're in a rush, or that snack at night or in the afternoon is a shake, that's good. That's another source of protein, so that's beneficial. So those are the 2 most popular ones. Other ones I look at are vitamin C, especially this time of year with people getting sick. And then fish oil, especially in contact sports, because not enough people really eat a lot of salmon and things like that. So it can help protect the brain. So those are probably the most common ones. And then we look at, bone injuries. Do you need vitamin D and calcium? Uh, Vitamin D, easy to get from food, easy to get from the sunlight, especially in the summer. Calcium, if we have someone that doesn't really like dairy or almonds, then we might look into a calcium supplement. But those are not as common. Then you get all these other ones like BCAAs, which is a waste of money, multivitamins, which don't really work too well. And then some people will take magnesium specifically or things like that. And that's where we really get into the individualization of, do you need this? Do you not need this? You don't need this, but it's not harmful. So if you want to keep taking it, it's just a waste of money, but go for it. Like, you kind of get to nitty gritty there. But yeah.
Yeah, awesome. Building on that, another I think important thing within the I guess nutrition training, all of that talk is hydration. So, what's the importance of hydration both with your nutrition and then also just in performance for athletes?
Hydration is so important. It's like the silent killer because we think about how much we need to eat and, getting your calories and getting your protein, carbs, and all that. But we don't realize that water also impacts our energy and our injury levels as well, but not just water, the electrolytes. So, if here's the analogy we use, right? Think about a piece of raw steak and a piece of beef jerky, right? Try to rip a raw steak with your hands. Not that easy. Beef jerky, right away. The difference there is hydration, right? That's like your muscles. Your dehydrated muscles are a lot easier to tear. If at Duke, when I was there, like where our office was right near like the weight room, and there's like the Gatorade fountain with the water and all that, and the soccer locker room was in that building too. So every time I see a soccer player, like, hey, they had these bottles, right? And I would always be like, hey, go fill up your bottle, fill it with Gatorade or fill it with water, whatever it was, because I wanted them to stay hydrated because it was so important, and it often gets overlooked. So yeah, always staying hydrated, but not just water, right? Get the Gatorade or Powerade in there, or any other like sports drink like that, but also add electrolytes. Because if you're going to sweat a lot and you just drink plain water, you're going to hurt yourself. You might even pass out because of low sodium levels. So it's really important to stay hydrated. And on top of that, people ask how much water should I drink, and we go through that. But it's all about just like how much you drink throughout the day. So one thing I always recommend is keep this water bottle out. So if you're in class, keep the water bottle on your desk if you're allowed to. If you're at home doing homework, keep the water bottle out in front of you. Always have it. Don't keep it in your backpack, keep it in front of you because you're more likely to drink. And little things like that add up throughout the day to help you enhance your hydration status because, yeah, you could do all the right training, get good sleep, eat enough calories and all that. But if you're dehydrated, you're going to feel like crap.
Yeah, and it is such a convenience thing. If you have I carry around a half-gallon hydro jug because if I don't, I will, if for me, having a smaller bottle, I don't fill it up often enough. And so I have to make it as easy for myself as possible to be drinking that water. So I like that you say, just make it easier on yourself, always have it, because you're right, you will reach for it more often if it's accessible. And if you're not carrying it around, you're probably going to forget, and then you're going to get to the point where it's a problem and you're like, I haven't drank any water today, and now you're going to suffer a bit, whatever, even if you're not an athlete, just in general, hydration, you'll definitely tell once you get to the point of not a good place.
Yeah.
I want to transition, just as we kind of wrap up a little bit, into some training stuff, because I know that is also a piece of what you do or your background. So what does it look like to pair mindful nutrition with training, and why is that important for athletes to have both pieces?
Yeah. It's basically, as an athlete, when you train, you do your strength training, your conditioning, your sport, you're doing all that to become a better athlete. And it kind of mentioned before, right? It's if you don't eat properly, then that training, you don't get the benefits of that training. You're not able to work hard. You're not able to recover from it. You might feel like you're working hard, but without proper nutrition, you're maybe going 70, 80% of your max capacity. And with that said, yeah, your training needs to be sport specific in a sense. So you can't just go and lift like a bodybuilder or lift like a fitness person that just wants to build muscle, because you need to build functional muscle. So, we talk about like squatting is a big one, right? And it'd be like, oh, you got to go, you got to get your glutes below your knees or go squat to the ground. And that's great if you want to build a big butt. But how often in any sport is your butt on the ground like that, right? No, when you run, you're quarter squat. When you jump, you go to a quarter squat. So if your goal is to be a faster runner, to jump higher, don't squat all the way down. Do quarter squats with pace, with momentum. Yeah, you might not build as big of a butt, but that's not what you're going for. At least, or if it is, then stop playing your sport. You want to lift for that sport. So mimic the mechanics there. Do that quarter squat, and you're going to run faster. You're going to jump higher. Same thing with like accessory workout, right? If you have 10 minutes at the end of your workout and you want to sit there and do bicep curls and tricep extensions to look good, fine. If you don't have that time, don't do it. You're going to work those muscles in the compound lifts, and those muscles do not benefit you in sports. Like, to an extent, like they're vanity muscles. So stop wasting your time, because we talk about how precious time is with these athletes. So don't waste your time on workouts like that. But yeah, you got to train. A lot of the fitness advice people are getting is obviously from social media, and it's from bodybuilders and personal trainers. And a lot of them don't give out great advice, but even the ones that do give out good advice, it's not designed for athletes. Lifting 5 to 6 days a week is not good as an athlete. We need 3 to 4 days. That's it. That's all you need. You spend more time training for your sport, conditioning, and recovering. Otherwise, you're going to look great, but you're going to look great sitting on the bench. And that's the harsh way that I put it, and that's where it gets through.
Yeah. So with that training, you've mentioned a little bit about how things change, like in season and off season, specifically with like strength training. What is the difference typically, like just broad differences between training in the in season and also off season?
That's a great question. It's a big difference, right? So in season, your goal is not to become a better athlete during the season. Your goal is to be as strong and as healthy at the beginning of preseason or at the end of the season as you are when you started the preseason, right? Injuries happen, muscle loss happens, all that, because athletes don't take care of their bodies. So we get some athletes that are like, oh, I want to keep building muscle, so I'm going to lift 4 times a week during the season. Well, you're not going to build a muscle, or if you are, you don't have enough energy for your games, so you're hurting yourself. Or athletes be like, oh, I don't want to lift at all because I don't want to get sore or I don't have time. Now you're losing muscle, your performance is going to decrease, and you're going to get injured. So in season, you really want to, ideally twice a week, but at most, or at the very least once a week, you're going to lift. And it's going to be a full body lift, but it's really simple. In and out, 30, 45 minutes, that's it. The program I have designed, it's just one superset. So you might do like a bench, a barbell row, and a squat, and go through that circuit 3 times. And then the second day of the week, you might do the same thing, but maybe you do a deadlift instead of a squat. That's it. That's enough. If you do that twice a week, that's enough to maintain the muscle that you built in the off season, maintain your strength, reduce your injury risk. If you don't do any of that, you're going to lose muscle throughout the season. That can increase injury risk, but more so what happens is now when you start your off-season training, that first month or so is spent rebuilding the muscle that you lost during the season. And we don't want that. You want to be able to continue building muscle, get ahead of it. And that's why, when I worked at Georgia, we did body composition testing, like the bod pods, for a lot of the sports. And we did it like 4 times a year. And 2 of the markers were right before the season and right after the season. And although we were the ones doing the testing, these numbers were really a lot for the strength coaches, because we wanted to see like, hey, these athletes are losing 5-10 pounds of muscle during the season. We need to fix what they're doing with their training. And part of it was nutrition too, make sure you get the protein. But yeah, we need to fix that training. Now, off season is where you make the changes. So if you want to build muscle or if you want to lose weight, either one, this is when you do it. Now you're going to lift 3 or 4 times a week, depending on your goals. These lifts are going to be a little bit longer. You're going to do more conditioning. It's also where you change the diet. You increase your calories, decrease your calories, depending on that goal. But this is when you make the changes. The big question I get is, well, what if I don't have, like for athletes, what if I don't have an off season? When do I make these changes? And my answer is, if you are in a position, in a spot where you need to make significant changes to your body in order to become the best athlete you can be, then you shouldn't be playing competitively year round. Because why? What's the point of going to these showcases and these tournaments if you're not the best version of yourself? So we look at that and say, okay, maybe you don't play fall ball this year. Maybe you skip the summer tournaments and you focus on your body. And then junior year, you can go do that stuff. But yeah, a lot of athletes get hung up on it, and they're going to do these tournaments and these showcases and still lift 4 times a week. And when you try to do too many things, you end up accomplishing nothing. So it's really take advantage of that off season, become a better athlete, and then you only need one or two good showcases, and you're gonna get your looks. But you got to take care of yourself first.
Yeah, I think that's pretty common. I mean, I played 3 sports in high school. I was also at very small school, but I know it's pretty common for especially like youth athletes to be specializing really early. And I just talked to a physical therapist a couple weeks ago, and he was like, "This it's not the best often when you're specializing and then doing that year round physically. Like you're seeing
Yeah,
all these overuse injuries too." Um, so it is kind of cool. Like I didn't have a lot of off seasons where I wasn't playing any sport because I was just like doing it all.
yeah,
But there was times that like you're not doing the same capacity and then also doing different things. So that's a little different. But
yeah,
it's interesting to hear about the difference because I know like physically you might feel like you can keep doing all the same things throughout the season and everything, but like you said, in reality, if you're doing too much, then you're not really accomplishing anything.
yeah.
So I want to give you a chance if you have anything to add, and then we'll wrap up with the last question.
Yeah. So just kind of adding on to that, yeah, say don't play year round. If you're gonna play multiple sports, that is a different story because you're you're learning different skills there, and you do see a lot, a good amount of pro athletes that played multiple sports and succeeded. Right? We look at football, right? Look at how many quarterbacks, Patrick Mahomes, right? A lot of what he does as a quarterback and what makes him so great is his baseball, the way he would throw a baseball, like the sidearm, like that's helped him as a quarterback. You see a lot of tight ends that played basketball. There's tight ends in the NFL that never played football until they got to the NFL. They were basketball players. And that basketball skill and natural athleticism made him a great tight end. So playing multiple sports can make you great. I remember in high school, our goalie, right, our sophomore year, it was basically his first year playing goalie. He made varsity. He was never a goalie. He played some other position. And our coach knew that he was a really good basketball player. And he's like, hey, let's try you in goal. And he became an amazing goalie simply because his height, but his athleticism from being a basketball player made him such a great goalie. And I'll have clients that play football and they're doing wrestling in the offseason, help them with form and things like that. And that's fine because even though you're doing another sport, you're still technically doing some kind of off-season training for your main sport. And that's okay. It's the playing games for one sport 12 months a year that is really harming you.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, to give you the last question, this is the one that everyone gets to answer on this podcast. What does it look like for you to live authentically?
Yeah, I like that. Because that's something I really actually did struggle a lot with when I first started my private practice because it's always lead by example and things like that. But working with a lot of high school and college athletes, it's hard for me to lead by example because I'm not doing what they're doing. And what's unique about this is almost all my clients are in better shape than me, right? And that sounds bad as a dietitian and as a trainer and all that. Like I should be in better shape, but no, I'm working with some of the best athletes in the world. Like they're going to be in better shape than me, but that's fine because a lot of it's genetics and just what you're given. So that was something I did struggle with a lot. But I kind of come to a grasp with it. But what I do to live authentically is that's why I started picking up running. That's why I started doing half marathons and stuff like that. And it's given me a much better perspective as far as like, okay, like I'm telling all my runners to do all these things. Now I'm going to do it myself. And I've started, to help me gel with them better, kind of get that better connection, both on social media and with my private clients. And just I try to, get my good sleep. I try to meal prep as often as I can. I don't restrict my food, but I also don't just go crazy with it. Like I'll go out to eat, my fiance wants to go get pizza or we want to go out to dinner. Like we do that. And I don't have any guilt associated with that. But at the same time, we'll be like, we should cook tonight because we ate out last few nights. So I don't go off the rails either. So I really just try to practice what I preach in that sense. But I also have to understand that there's things that I'm telling my clients to do that I can't do myself or I shouldn't do myself because I'm not doing what they're doing physically, and I shouldn't be because I'm not trying to become a college athlete. So it's a little tricky there, but as best I can to be healthy, fuel for my own personal performance, and relay that information to them.
Yeah. Awesome answer. Well, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it. And
I know
this is going to be super helpful for many. So thank you.
Of course. Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening to Authentic Performance, the podcast. We would love to hear what you found valuable in this episode, so send us a DM on Instagram at Authentic Performance or leave us a review on whatever platform you enjoy most. We want to thank you for your continued support of this project. It truly means the world. We also want to invite you to be a part of the Authentic Performance fam, so follow us on socials and subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube. For more information about how to get involved or to see how we're supporting athletes, go to theauthenticperformance.com. Finally, let us know what you want to hear on the podcast and who you want to hear from. We want to give you the best possible resources and support, and your feedback helps us do that. In the meantime, think about how you can live authentically. See you next time.